100 miles south of Denver, surrounded by 12 gun towers in the Colorado high desert, sits America's only federal supermax prison. The United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX Florence, nicknamed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. No one has ever escaped from ADX Florence since it opened in 1995. Inside these walls, 380 of America's most dangerous criminals spend 23 hours per day in 7 by 12-foot concrete cells in near total isolation. Drug lords, terrorists, serial killers, spies, gang leaders, men so violent, so dangerous, that they cannot be housed in regular maximum security prisons. This is where the federal government sends inmates who have proven they will kill guards, murder other prisoners, or orchestrate criminal empires from behind bars. Former Warden Robert Hood calls ADX Florence worse than death, and the death penalty on a payment plan. This is the story of life inside America's harshest prison, where the most notorious criminals in federal custody wait to die. Subscribe now for more prison documentaries from America's most extreme facilities. Hit that notification bell. Joaquin Archivaldo Guzman Lara, age 67, internationally known as El Chapo, Shorty in Spanish, former leader of the Sinaloa cartel, one of the world's most powerful drug trafficking organizations. El Chapo is serving life plus 30 years for drug trafficking, money laundering, and ordering dozens of murders. He arrived at ADX Florence on July 19, 2019, 2 days after his sentencing in New York. El Chapo had escaped from Mexican maximum security prisons twice before. In 2001, smuggled out in a laundry basket, and in 2015, through a mile-long tunnel dug beneath his shower stall complete with motorcycle and lighting. Those escapes made him a legend. ADX Florence is designed specifically to prevent another escape. El Chapo is housed in Range 13, a special 4-cell wing within the special housing unit reserved for inmates requiring the absolute tightest control. As of 2022, only 2 inmates are publicly known to occupy Range 13, El Chapo and 1993 World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef. These 4 cells represent the most isolated, restricted, controlled environment in the entire United States federal prison system. October 22, 1983. United States Penitentiary, Marion, Illinois. 2 Aryan Brotherhood members, Thomas Silverstein and Clayton Fountain, murdered 2 correctional officers in separate attacks on the same day. An inmate passed Silverstein a sharpened prison weapon while he was being escorted from the shower. Silverstein stabbed Officer Merle Klutz 29 times, killing him. That same afternoon, a different inmate slipped Clayton Fountain a weapon. Fountain stabbed Officer Robert Hoffman to death. These murders demonstrated that even in maximum security prisons, violent inmates could kill staff. Marion went into permanent lockdown for 23 years, operating as a prototype for Supermax control. But the Federal Bureau of Prisons needed a purpose-built facility designed from the ground up for absolute control and containment. ADX Florence was commissioned specifically to house prisoners capable of extreme violence, inmates whose escape would threaten national security, and offenders too high-profile or dangerous for even maximum security. The facility opened January 10, 1995, costing $60 million to construct on 600 acres donated by Fremont County, Colorado, which desperately wanted the jobs the prison would bring. 7 feet wide, 12 feet long, 84 square feet, smaller than most parking spaces. This is an ADX Florence cell, where inmates spend 23 hours every single day. The bed, desk, and stool are poured concrete, fixed permanently in place to prevent them from being used as weapons. A combination stainless steel toilet and sink sits in the corner. A small shower with a timer to prevent flooding. The walls, floor, and ceiling are reinforced concrete designed to be soundproof. The cell door is solid steel with a narrow slot for meal delivery. There's a single window, 4 inches wide, 4 feet tall, positioned to show only sky, preventing inmates from determining their location within the facility or seeing the Rocky Mountains visible outside the prison. No television, no radio, no photographs allowed on walls. Minimal personal property. The fluorescent light never fully turns off. Former inmate Jack Powers, who served 15 years in ADX, described it as a sarcophagus underground, a place where you're literally buried alive. The concrete cell becomes your entire world. Most inmates will die here, having spent decades in these 84 square feet. Dzhokhar Anzorovich Tsarnaev, age 32, Chechen-American terrorist, convicted of the April 15, 2013 Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 people and injured hundreds more. Tsarnaev and his older brother Tamerlan planted 2 pressure cooker bombs near the marathon finish line. The explosions ripped through crowds of spectators, tearing off limbs, shredding flesh, creating carnage and terror. 3 days later, the brothers murdered MIT police officer Sean Collier during their attempted escape. Tamerlan died in a shootout with police. Dzhokhar was captured hiding in a boat in a Watertown backyard. He was 19 years old. A federal jury convicted him and sentenced him to death on multiple counts. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev currently sits on federal death row at ADX Florence, awaiting execution by lethal injection. His case has been through years of appeals. Some argue he was influenced by his older brother and deserves life imprisonment instead of death. Others, particularly victims and their families, insist he must be executed for the horrific attack. Meanwhile, Tsarnaev spends 23 hours per day in his concrete cell, one of the youngest inmates in ADX history, waiting to learn if the state will kill him. 6 a.m. Fluorescent lights brighten slightly in the cells, signaling morning. Breakfast arrives through the slot in the cell door. Powdered eggs, cold toast, orange juice. Inmates eat alone in their cells. No communal dining, no conversation, just the sound of chewing and the hum of ventilation. The rest of the morning is silence, reading, push-ups, pacing the 12 feet from wall to wall, talking to yourself, going slowly insane from sensory deprivation. At noon, lunch arrives through the slot. In the afternoon, if you're lucky, you get your hour of recreation. But recreation at ADX isn't what most people imagine. You're taken to a concrete enclosure called a dog run, essentially a large cage below ground level, surrounded by 4 walls with only sky visible above. You can walk a few paces in each direction, alone. No equipment, no other inmates, just concrete and chain link and sky. Former Warden Robert Hood described watching inmates during recreation. The operations of ADX are built around incapacitation. The way they handle you, they're trying to bring you to the absolute depth of human subjection, without killing you. After 1 hour, you return to your cell. Dinner. More silence. Sleep. Repeat. Forever. Terry Lynn Nichols, age 70, conspirator in the April 19, 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in American history until September 11. Nichols and Timothy McVeigh, anti-government extremists, built a massive truck bomb containing over 2 tons of ammonium nitrate fertilizer and nitromethane racing fuel. The bomb destroyed the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people, including 19 children, in the building's daycare center. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection in 2001. Nichols received life without parole, avoiding the death penalty by a hung jury. He's been incarcerated at ADX Florence since 2005, serving 161 consecutive life terms. Nichols spends his days in his concrete cell, reading, writing letters that are heavily monitored, and reflecting on the horror he helped create. The children who died in the Oklahoma City bombing would be adults now, in their 30s, with families of their own. Instead, they're dead, and Terry Nichols sits in a concrete box for the rest of his life, haunted by what he did or convinced he was justified. No one really knows which. Robert had served as warden of ADX Florence from 2002 to 2005. He had spent over 20 years with the Federal Bureau of Prisons, believed in rehabilitation, preferred walking around and interacting with inmates, thought prisoners should have reasonable access to each other. Then he was assigned to run America's Supermax. It's a tomb, a mausoleum, Hood tells interviewers. People are there to die. Hood describes the psychological impact of touring the facility, seeing the Rocky Mountains in the beautiful Colorado landscape, then stepping inside where inmates will never see those mountains again. As soon as they come through the door, you see it in their faces. That's when it really hits you. You're looking at the beauty of the Rocky Mountains in the backdrop. When you get inside, that is the last time you will ever see it. The Supermax is life after death. It's long-term. In my opinion, it's far much worse than death. Hood eventually left ADX, disturbed by the conditions, believing the facility creates more problems than it solves. He's since become an advocate for prison reform, arguing that long-term solitary confinement constitutes torture and violates human dignity even for the worst criminals. Ramzi Ahmed Youssef, age 57, terrorist and mastermind of the February 26, 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Youssef and conspirators built a 1,300-pound urea nitrate bomb, loaded it into a rented van, and detonated it in the parking garage beneath the North Tower. The explosion killed 6 people, injured over 1,000, and created a crater several stories deep. Youssef's goal was to topple the North Tower into the South Tower, collapsing both buildings and killing tens of thousands. The towers survived, but the precedent was set. 8 years later, on September 11, 2001, terrorists succeeded where Youssef failed, destroying both towers and killing nearly 3,000 people. Youssef fled to Pakistan after the bombing, where he continued plotting attacks, including a plan to blow up 11 U.S. airliners simultaneously over the Pacific Ocean. He was captured in 1995 and convicted in 1998. Youssef is serving life without parole at ADX Florence, housed in Range 13 alongside El Chapo. During his sentencing, the judge told Youssef he would spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. Nearly 30 years later, that prophecy holds true. Youssef will die in his concrete cell, having never achieved his apocalyptic vision. December 2024. In the final weeks of his presidency, Joe Biden commuted the death sentences of 37 federal death row inmates to life without parole. Biden halted federal executions during his administration, breaking from Donald Trump's first term when 13 federal inmates were executed in a 6-month span, more federal executions than in the previous 60 years combined. Biden's clemency spared murderers, terrorists, and violent offenders from execution. Then Trump returned to office in January 2025. On his first day, Trump signed Executive Order 1416 for directing Attorney General Pam Bondi to ensure the commuted inmates are imprisoned in conditions consistent with the monstrosity of their crimes and the threats they pose. Translation: punish them anyway. By September 2025, the Justice Department had transferred 10 former death row inmates to ADX Florence, despite many having clean disciplinary records and no history of violence in prison. The ACLU filed a federal lawsuit arguing the transfers violated policy and constituted illegal punishment for receiving clemency. A federal judge denied the injunction. The transfers continued. Now, former death row inmates who thought they'd escaped execution face something worse: decades of solitary confinement at ADX, buried alive in concrete cells. Halfway through this journey inside America's harshest prison. Drop a comment. Is ADX Florence necessary for public safety or cruel and unusual punishment? Hit that like button. Larry Hoover, age 74, founder and leader of the Gangster Disciples, one of America's largest and most violent street gangs, with over 30,000 members across 35 states. Hoover has been incarcerated since 1973 for murder, but continued running the Gangster Disciples from prison for decades, overseeing drug trafficking operations, generating millions of dollars annually. Federal investigators uncovered evidence that Hoover maintained leadership through coded messages, prison visits, and corrupted guards. In 1997, he was convicted of drug conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to operate a criminal enterprise while imprisoned. He received 6 life sentences. Hoover was transferred to ADX Florence, specifically to cut off his communication with the gang. In 2018, rapper Kanye West asked President Trump to pardon Hoover, arguing he'd reformed. Federal agents strongly opposed any clemency, maintaining Hoover still posed a threat. Hoover remains at ADX, spending 23 hours daily in solitary confinement, now 74 years old, still serving his 6 life sentences. The gangster disciples continue operating without him, but the federal government refuses to release or transfer Hoover, convinced he'd immediately resume control if given any opportunity to communicate with the outside world. Jack Powers, age 64, former ADX Florence inmate who served 15 years in solitary confinement from 1999 to 2014. Powers was sent to ADX after escaping from federal prison in Atlanta by hiding in a drainage grate, climbing the building with a makeshift grappling hook, scaling an electrified fence and barbed wire, stealing a car, and driving to Syracuse to see his 14-year-old son. He was on the run for 2 days before being captured. That escape attempt cost him 15 years in America's harshest prison. Powers documented his experience in the book ADX Supermax, the Alcatraz of the Rockies. He describes arriving at the facility on October 2, 2001. Everything's done in slow motion. The garage door opens, the bus drives in, the door shuts, and everything is pitch black. Powers describes ADX as a place where you're literally buried alive, left 24/7 in a fairly small concrete steel cage, a sarcophagus underground. He struggled with despair, isolation, sensory deprivation. I didn't think I was ever going to come out of there alive. I went through the flames. I went to the edge of the pits. Powers was released in 2014 and now advocates for prison reform, calling ADX the death penalty on a payment plan. Richard Colvin Reed, age 52, British-born terrorist, who attempted to destroy American Airlines Flight 63 on December 22, 2001, by detonating explosives hidden in his shoes. Reed boarded the Miami-bound flight from Paris with bombs made of PTN plastic explosive hidden in the soles and heels of his sneakers. Mid-flight over the Atlantic Ocean, Reed tried to light the fuse with matches. Flight attendants and passengers noticed the smell of sulfur. They tackled Reed and restrained him for the rest of the flight. The plane diverted to Boston, where Reed was arrested. Bomb experts later confirmed the explosives could have blown a hole in the fuselage and brought down the aircraft, killing all 185 passengers and crew. Reed pleaded guilty to terrorism charges and was sentenced to life without parole plus 110 years. He's been incarcerated at ADX Florence since 2002. Reed has filed multiple lawsuits complaining about prison conditions, including claims that restrictions on his Islamic religious practice constitute torture. His complaints have been universally rejected. Reed will die at ADX Florence, remembered not for any ideology, but for being the shoe bomber, the fool who tried to blow up a plane and instead got tackled by passengers and condemned to decades of concrete isolation. 23 hours per day in solitary confinement. No meaningful human contact. No natural light beyond a 4-inch window showing only sky. No stimulation. No community. Just concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and your own deteriorating mind. Mental health experts universally agree. Prolonged solitary confinement causes severe psychological damage. Studies document increased rates of anxiety, depression, paranoia, hallucinations, cognitive dysfunction, and suicide. A 2013 Bureau of Prisons report found 174 ADX inmates had spent 5 to 19 years consecutively in solitary confinement. Many inmates suffer psychotic breaks, hearing voices, seeing things that aren't there, losing touch with reality. Some mutilate themselves. Others attempt suicide. Former ADX psychologists described inmates struggling with mental health crises. Yet Bureau of Prisons policy states that inmates currently diagnosed as suffering from serious psychiatric illnesses should not be referred for placement at ADX Florence. That policy is routinely ignored. When former death row inmates were threatened with transfer to ADX in 2025, several became suicidal. One prisoner wrote an essay stating he was making elaborate plans to string himself up rather than endure ADX conditions. Mental health advocates argue ADX constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, torture by isolation. Federal courts consistently disagree, ruling that security needs justify the conditions. Zacharias Moussaoui, age 57, French citizen of Moroccan descent, the only person convicted in U.S. court for direct involvement in the September 11th terrorist attacks. Moussaoui trained at al-Qaeda camps in Afghanistan and was allegedly designated as a potential hijacker. He was arrested in August 2001, weeks before September 11th, after flight school instructors reported his suspicious behavior. He wanted to learn to fly commercial jets, but wasn't interested in takeoffs or landings. After September 11th, federal prosecutors charged Moussaoui with conspiracy to commit acts of terrorism. During his trial, Moussaoui initially pleaded guilty, then recanted, then pleaded guilty again, claiming he was supposed to fly a fifth plane into the White House. He gave a series of bizarre, rambling testimonies. The jury sentenced him to life, without parole rather than death. Moussaoui is serving his sentence at ADX Florence under special administrative measures that mandate near-complete isolation. He's filed numerous lawsuits claiming torture, religious persecution, psychological abuse. He writes letters proclaiming innocence, denouncing former al-Qaeda allies, making contradictory statements. Mental health experts believe he's severely mentally ill, possibly schizophrenic. But Moussaoui remains at ADX, spending decades in solitary confinement for his role in America's deadliest terrorist attack. Range 13. 4 cells total. 2 currently occupied. Ramzi Youssef in one cell, Joaquin El Chapo Guzman in another. For over 5 years, these two have been the only inmates on Range 13, the most restricted unit in ADX Florence. Each cell is 12 feet by 7 feet, equipped with concrete bed, desk, toilet, shower, and a separate recreation cage accessible through a back door. The cages are individual enclosures below ground level, surrounded by 4 walls, preventing any physical contact between inmates. El Chapo and his Range 13 neighbor have communicated by shouting through cell doors. All conversations are monitored and recorded visually and audibly by the Bureau of Prisons and FBI. El Chapo speaks no English, only Spanish. Few ADX staff speak Spanish. His communication is severely limited. He's written letters to the judge who sentenced him, complaining that the conditions here are inhuman, that he's been unable to get basic necessities like stamps for letters. In March 2025, El Chapo and another Range 13 inmate filed a motion asking permission to have recreation time together in adjacent cages so they could at least walk and talk simultaneously, still separated by chain link. The request is pending. This is El Chapo's life now. Concrete cell, 1 hour in a cage, shouted conversations through steel doors, complete isolation from his family, his cartel, the world he once controlled. Robert Philip Hansen, age 81, former FBI special agent who spied for Soviet and Russian intelligence agencies for 22 years, making him the most damaging traitor in FBI history. Hansen sold thousands of classified documents to the Russians, compromising dozens of U.S. intelligence operations and causing the execution of at least 3 Russian intelligence sources working for the United States. He betrayed his country for cash and ego, receiving over $1.4 million from Soviet and Russian handlers. Hansen was arrested in February 2001 while making a dead drop in a Virginia park. To avoid the death penalty, he pleaded guilty to 15 counts of espionage and conspiracy. He was sentenced to life without parole and sent to ADX Florence. On June 5, 2023, Hansen was found unresponsive in his ADX cell. He was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead at age 79 from natural causes. Hansen spent 22 years at ADX before dying. His espionage caused incalculable damage to U.S. national security. His solitary confinement at ADX ensured he could never pass another secret to foreign adversaries. Hansen's death in prison was unremarkable, barely noted in news coverage. Just another old man dying in a concrete cell, his treason unredeemed. ADX Florence has never had a successful escape in 30 years of operation. The facility was designed from inception to be escape-proof. 12 gun towers surround the complex, each staffed by armed officers with clear sightlines. Motion detectors throughout the facility. Over 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors. Laser beams. Surveillance cameras monitoring every corridor, every cell, every movement. Attack dogs trained to respond to breaches. Remote panic buttons allowing instant facility-wide lockdown. The prison sits on 37 acres in the Colorado high desert, miles from any city, surrounded by nothing but empty landscape. Even if an inmate somehow escaped their cell, got past motion detectors, bypassed cameras and laser beams, evaded attack dogs, climbed walls topped with razor wire, outran armed guards in 12 towers, they'd still be in the middle of nowhere with every law enforcement agency in Colorado hunting them. The architecture itself prevents escape. Reinforced concrete walls 2 feet thick, ceilings designed to prevent tampering, windows showing only sky so inmates can't determine their location. Guards are carefully selected and screened to prevent corruption. No single officer has access to all security systems. Every movement requires multiple checks. The result, absolute security. No one gets out. No one has ever gotten out. No one will ever get out. Theodore John Kaczynski, the Unabomber, died at ADX Florence on June 10, 2023, at age 81. Kaczynski, a mathematics prodigy turned domestic terrorist, conducted a 17-year bombing campaign from 1978 to 1995, killing 3 people and injuring 23 others. His bombs targeted universities, airlines, and technology companies. He lived as a hermit in a primitive cabin in Montana, handcrafting sophisticated explosive devices and mailing them to victims. His 35,000-word manifesto, Industrial Society and Its Future, railed against modern technology and industrialization. The FBI finally caught him in 1996 after his brother recognized the manifesto's writing style and turned him in. Kaczynski pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty and was sentenced to life without parole. He was housed at ADX Florence from 2005 until his death. On June 10, 2023, Kaczynski was found unresponsive in his cell. He was transported to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. The cause was later ruled suicide. Theodore Kaczynski spent his final 18 years in solitary confinement at ADX Florence. His anti-technology manifesto now mostly forgotten. His bombing campaign a footnote in terrorism history. He died alone in a concrete cell, exactly as he lived in his Montana cabin, isolated, alone, convinced of his righteousness. ADX Florence represents the most extreme end of America's criminal justice system. Supporters argue it's necessary to incapacitate the most dangerous criminals, preventing them from harming others or continuing to orchestrate crimes from prison. Federal prosecutors point to inmates like El Chapo, who escaped twice from maximum security prisons, or Larry Hoover, who ran a criminal empire from behind bars for decades. Without ADX's extreme restrictions, these men would continue threatening public safety. Critics counter that prolonged solitary confinement constitutes torture, violates human dignity, and causes severe psychological damage even to the worst offenders. Organizations like the ACLU and Amnesty International have condemned ADX conditions as cruel and unusual punishment. Former Warden Robert Hood calls it worse than death. Studies show solitary confinement doesn't rehabilitate, it breaks minds. Human rights advocates argue that even terrorists and murderers deserve humane treatment. The debate continues. ADX Florence remains operational, housing 380 inmates in concrete cells. Some will be transferred to lower security prisons after years of good behavior. Most will die at ADX, having spent decades in isolation. The government calls it necessary security. Critics call it state-sanctioned torture. Whatever you call it, ADX Florence represents the end of a line in America's prison system, a concrete tomb where the worst of the worst spend their final years waiting to die. That's the reality inside ADX Florence, America's only federal supermax. Subscribe for more prison documentaries from the darkest corners of the U.S. justice system. Comment below, is ADX Florence necessary for public safety, or does it go too far? Should anyone be held in solitary confinement for decades? Check out our other videos on death row facilities and maximum security prisons across America. Thanks for watching.